Well, good evening, brothers and sisters. Welcome again. We are going to look at 5 chapters today. If you remember, last week we didn't finish chapter 20. We were looking at all the rebellions of Judah, and from verse 30 onwards is the regathering, the song that we just heard just now, that God will regather his people back. And then we are going to chapter 21, 22, 23, and 24 is when the final conquest occur, when Nebuchadnezzar will invade Jerusalem and eventually burn down the entire capital of Israel as well as the temple of God. So, and that will be the end of part 1, the first 24 chapters. So thank you. So many of you have faithfully been following all the 24 chapters in our studies together. And so today we will end with chapter 24. Stay with me. We may take a bit longer time today. And that is the end where we look at the theme of 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 17. Judgment begins in the house of the Lord. All right. So next week, we'll be looking at, now that Ezekiel has finished God's decree for his displeasure, for his appeal and the rebellion of his people and the final destruction of Jerusalem and the exile to Babylon. From chapter 25 onwards, God turns his attention to the nations around Israel. So all the nations that have been looking at Israel and ridiculing Israel to say, you who have believed in this God, where is your God now? All right. So God, as we looked at last week, God has always wanted Israel to be the bearer of his name. And now that God has allowed Nebuchadnezzar to destroy Babylon, all these nations are going to be rejoicing and gleeful that the God of Israel has forsaken his people and has not kept his oath to protect his people. All right. So from next week, come and join us. So we'll be looking at the nation of Jordan, today's Jordan. We'll be looking at Gaza, today's Gaza, the Hamas territory, and we'll be looking at Syria. All right. So all these nations that are surrounding Israel today, the Middle East nations that are taunting Israel even to this day, where is your God, and so on, God is going to judge them and reveal himself to them. And right now we are seeing this thing happening where Ezekiel prophesied 600 years before Christ, 2,600 years ago. Now we are seeing things like Hamas is saying their God is with them, their God is shielding them, their God is deflecting all our rockets into the Mediterranean Sea. We are aiming our rockets at Ashdod, Ashkelon, and so on, but our rockets couldn't hit those cities because their God has pushed our rockets into the sea. Now, that's what God wants, that the nations around will look at Israel, who depends on their God. And God is going to keep that promise. All right, so it's very exciting. From next week onwards, come and join us. We're going to look at what's going to happen to Lebanon. We're going to look at what's going to happen to Egypt, and so on. Also, for the next 3 or 4 sessions, we'll be looking at that. Okay, last week we were looking at Israel being always chosen by God to be his vessel. And we have been looking at how God relates to his nation, Israel, from the very past to the present, Ezekiel's day, and to the future, our time. All right. And how God deals with the nation of Israel is more than what we see on the surface. The intention is God wants to show not just to his people who he is, but to also show to the nations around Israel, to the world, who God is, what is his purpose for Israel and what is his purpose for the world. All right, so remember that's the overriding design of God for his creation, right? The entire world, right? And God's message to the world and to the nations is this: watch Israel. I have chosen them to be a sign. I've chosen them to be a model on how I would deal with the whole creation. All right. So from Israel, you will learn of my righteousness. From Israel, you will learn of my mercy and of my justice. All right. So when Israel rebel against me, you will learn of my justice. So Israel becomes that that spotlight in which God uses to teach the world of his ways and of his purposes for his entire creation. All right. And through Israel, God demonstrates his mercy for Israel to see, as well as his justice. So it's a lesson on judgment and the faithfulness of God. And the world needs to learn from that. And that's what we were looking at last week. And we were looking at this agenda that how throughout the history of Israel, God had wanted to gather his people to him. All right. And how throughout history, ever since the exodus from Egypt, this nation had never wanted to be gathered by God, and they were not willing. And then comes to the time of Jesus. Okay, from the time of Exodus to the time of Jesus, that's almost another 2,000 years, 1,500 years. Jesus said the same thing to the people of Israel during his time. And he said, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those that God sent to you, how often had I wanted to gather you, as God wanted to gather your forefathers? How often had God wanted to gather you, as mother hen gathers his chicken, but you would not." All right, so from the time of Ezekiel to the time of Jesus, and Jesus mentioned that in Matthew chapter 23. Right? That's the messianic or the divine agenda for Israel. The purpose of all of the history of Israel has been to God gathering them. And the tragedy of history was they refused to do that. They were not willing, right? And therefore, Jesus said this in Matthew chapter 23, verse 39. But because of that, see, your house is left to you desolate. Your land will be desolate. I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." All right. So, when during the time of Ezekiel, where the people refused to repent and refused to be God's people, we know that within 3 years after that prophecy, Nebuchadnezzar came and destroyed Jerusalem and destroyed the temple. Solomon's temple was completely burned out, 586 BC. Okay? And right after Jesus said this, your house will be left to you desolate. Right? 30 years after that, Rome came and destroyed the second temple, Herod's temple. Same thing that happened during Ezekiel's time, that happened in the time of Yeshua. All right. So, but then there comes the promise of God to Abraham, the song that was sung to you, "I will gather you back." That's the promise that I gave to you in Genesis chapter 12. That's the promise I gave to you in Genesis chapter 17. This land I have given to you. All right. And therefore, God upholds this promise because of his name's sake. We told you, because he swore to Abraham, he swore to the people, "I raise my hands in an oath to you that, and therefore, for my own name's sake, I will restore you out of my mercy, not because you deserve it." All right, so the end of history is this, the triumph of all history, that the people will turn back to God, and then God will return them back to the land. Okay? So when will they say this? Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Baruch haba Besham Adonai. When will the people turn back and say this? It's with this. When the Antichrist set up the abomination of desolation, and the Jews suddenly realized that the Antichrist that they thought who would be their Messiah is not their Messiah. And then would they repent? Would they turn back to seek for the return of the Lord? Blessed is he who comes in the name of God. That is the only prerequisite for Jesus Christ's second coming. I will not come again until you say these very words, until you repent and you realize that the Antichrist is not the one that the Father has sent. And you look to me to return, and I shall return. By that time, 2/3 of Israel would have been killed by Antichrist, and only 1/3 left. Amen. Only 1/3 left. Just as it happened in the time of Ezekiel. Only 1/3 was taken off to Babylon. Remember in Ezekiel chapter 5, where Ezekiel had to shave bald and cut his hair. All right, 1/3 of the hair was chopped off by the sword, 1/3 of the hair was burned down, 1/3 of the hair was scattered to the wind, and even that he had to pursue the hair that was scattered into the wind and still chop some of them off. So less than 1/3 actually made it to Babylon. And from there, they will return. Same thing is going to happen in the time of Christ. 2/3 will be destroyed by the time Antichrist invades and occupies Jerusalem. And only 1/3 left, the 1/3 that Jesus has asked to flee into the wilderness. When you see that abomination, 1/3 will realize that this is not the Messiah, that this Antichrist, and they will all flee into the mountains of Edom, and God is going to keep them there for 3.5 years. And 1/3 shall return with Christ when he comes again. All right, and you find that in Isaiah chapter 61. So let's come to verse 34 onwards. 33. I stopped with that last week. As I live, says the Lord, surely with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, with my fury poured out, I will still rule over you. All right, so God is saying, whatever happens, you may be completely in rebellion against me. You may want to choose your own king. You may want to go your own way, but I will not let you go. All right, I will still rule over you. So we stopped there last week, and now we'll bring this out. I will bring you out from the nations. Look at this. This is plural. All right, so in verse 34, there is a snap forward to a future restoration. We are not talking of returning from Babylon. This is, I will bring you out from the nations today, plural. All right, and gather you out of the countries, plural, where you are scattered. So from 33 to 34, there is a jump to a future prophecy of the returning of the diaspora after the time of Jesus. After AD 70, when Rome destroyed Jerusalem, all the Jews were expelled out from Jerusalem, and up to today they are coming back. So this is the prophecy, verse 34, of that idea when the Jews are coming back into Israel today. I'll bring you back from all the countries with a mighty hand and with a fury poured out. Right? So that's talking about our end time today. I will bring you into the wilderness of the people. Now, verse 35 says, I'll bring you out into the wilderness again. Right? Now, this is not talking of Babylon anymore. This is talking of the time of the Antichrist, when Jesus says, when you see that abomination, you flee. Flee to the wilderness. All right, so this is the prophecy that Jesus was looking at in Matthew chapter 24. From Ezekiel, here in verse 20, verse 35 here. I will bring you into the wilderness of the people. And there I will plead my case with you as I pleaded my case with your fathers in Egypt, and I'll make you pass under the rod, under the shepherd's rod, and bring you into the bond of the covenant. Now, if you want to look at this one, go back to Revelation chapter 12. You will see this being fulfilled. All right. So Revelation chapter 12 also talks of that time when Satan is evicted out from heaven, and he comes down to earth with his wrath against the Jews, and there comes Antichrist trying to destroy the Jews, and the Jews fleeing into the wilderness. And there in the wilderness, God protects them and reason out with them and teaches them back to work for 3.5 years. That's the time of the great tribulation. All right, so verse 35 here is talking about the time of the great tribulation. We are looking not just at Babylonian captivity during the time of Ezekiel. Here is Ezekiel prophesying of a future time. All right, and remember, 2/3 is lost. Only 1/3. We are told that in Zechariah, in Zephaniah, and so on. Compared to what happened during World War II, 6 million Jews were killed during the Holocaust of Hitler. That 6 million actually comprised 1/3 of the entire Jewish population of the world. All right, during World War II, 1948, there were only about 18 million Jews in the world. The Holocaust killed 6 million of them. That's 1/3. But in the Great Tribulation, you are going to have double that amount killed. 2/3 being killed and 1/3 spared. And that's why we learn you drink a double portion of the iniquity. We'll come to that, all right? So we are talking about the regathering of the people, and we want to look at God's promise that he will regather them. That promise was given all the way back during the time of Moses itself. Look at Deuteronomy chapter 30. Deuteronomy chapter 29 talks about if you disobey me, if you disobey the commandments, if you break the statutes, you will be dispersed, you will be evicted, and so on. Right? So 29 are all the judgments of God if Israel failed to live up to the kingdom principles that God has given to them in the 10 Commandments at Mount Sinai. 28 is if you obey, these are all the blessings. 29, if you disobey, these are all the curses. That's what's going to happen. And then 30, Deuteronomy chapter 30 says this, but when I regather you back. All right, so there is this prophecy that Moses already saw way back during the time of the Exodus, that his people are going to break all the promises of God, break that covenant, they are going to be deported. And yet Moses was able to look back, to look forward to the time of God's mercy and the restoration of God's people being brought back to the land. And that's in Deuteronomy chapter 30. And now Ezekiel is prophesying it. All right. And so in the next few weeks, up to April, May, and June, we'll be looking at Ezekiel chapter 36. That's the details of the gathering, of the regathering, of how God bring them back, which is what is happening today. Right. So we notice that the first return was from Babylon. All right, after AD 70, according to the prophecy of Jeremiah, they'll only be evicted to Babylon for 70 years. After 70 years, God will bring them back. Right, and when Babylon is down, King Cyrus of Persia conquered Babylon, and King Cyrus was the Old Testament Messiah. Right, so God called him the Messiah itself. You find that in Isaiah. Right, so from go and read Isaiah 44, 45, 2 Chronicles chapter 36, prophesies of this. There will be this Persian king that will allow and promote the first return of Israel. All right, and only 40,000, 40 to 50,000 came back during the time of Ezra, Zerubbabel, and Nehemiah. That's about 450 BC. Okay, and it grew from 40,000, 50,000 to about 70,000 people during the time of the Roman Empire when Jesus came. Right, so there were about 70,000 Jews in Israel during the time of Jesus. All right, but you know what happened. All right, so stage two, after 70 AD, when the Jews rebelled against the Roman might, and how Rome destroyed all Jerusalem again, and the second expulsion happened. Rome expelled all the Jews from Israel and would not allow any Jews to return to Israel after 70 AD or 135 AD after the rebellion. And since then, for the past 1,900 years, the Jews have been scattered all over the world. All right, but God says, I will regather you from all the countries, from all the nations. We looked at that verse 35 just now. So this is what's happening since the 15th century, when you notice that all the Jews who have gone all over Europe, I give you this map here. There is a rise of anti-Semitism there, the persecution of the Jews, and you find that the Jews were trying to flee everywhere, right? And they after the Saladin, the Islamic Empire took over Jerusalem, they allowed the Jews to come back. All right. So the one thing good about Islamic Caliphate, when they took over Jerusalem after Saladin, after King Richard the Lionheart lost in the Crusades and so on, the Islamic Empire permitted the Jews to return, and there was a trickle that came back. A trickle that came back. Right? But during the Crusades, look at the church. During the Crusades, they killed so many Jews, right? And the population, the Jewish population in Israel came down to less than 2,000 during that time, right? And look at this. The Jews were expelled from France, from Spain in 1492, from England in the 13th century, and most of them ended up in Poland and Ukraine. Hello, Ukraine is here, right? Ukraine is here. That's new. And then Poland is there, right? So most of the Jews landed there, all right? And during the Second World War, you know what happened? Hitler started to kill all of them, and they came back from Poland, from Russia especially, all right? And 1880s was the birth of Zionism. There was a movement to restore back the land of Israel. And there was a movement in Europe. After all this persecution, they are crying to the European governments to let them return back to Israel. So that was the birth of the Zionist movement. And 1880 onwards, 24,000 came back to Israel. By the end of World War I, right, the Balfour Agreement, Great Britain agreed to allow Jews to return to Jerusalem, agreed in principle to set up Israel again after the end of the First World War, because Israel was helping the Western Empire, and 35,000 came back. But after the Second World War, 1948, after Hitler, 250,000 people came back. So you see the regathering here in stages. Now, I have the research articles on all this. If you're interested, let me know. I'll send you these articles, right? Also look at Morocco, look at Egypt. Okay, now these two countries are going to be blessed by God, because during those times, they were the only countries in Africa that received the Jewish refugees from Europe. Christian Europe, Catholic Europe persecuted them all over the place. But which are the countries that received them? Morocco, Egypt. Now we are going to look at Egypt for 4 chapters in 29 to 32, but that's all on God's judgment of Egypt, but there is a glorious end for Egypt in the end. All right, so I leave you on that. We'll come to that next time. Okay. Now, so here is the second regathering back to Israel, 1948, and you'll find that when we come to Ezekiel 36, 37. All right, the valley of the dry bones, where God told Ezekiel, will these dry bones live again? And Ezekiel said, I don't know, you know, God. And he said, prophesy to these dry bones and let all these dry bones live again. Now, dry bones has two meanings here. Let me just share this with you. Dry bones means Israel has been spread out throughout the world for 2,000 years now, since the Roman Empire destroyed Jerusalem in AD 70. For 2,000 years, they have been spread over. Israel is dead for 2,000 years. The bones are dry. All right, so all over the place, it's just turned to dust. So that's one way, the long view. But a short view is this: right after Hitler's Holocaust, 6 million Jews died. All the Jews that were in the concentration camps, they were just reduced to bones. Look at the bones here. So Ezekiel 37 talks about, can these dry bones live? Yes, they all came back and they are alive, right? So today, the second regathering, the Aliyah, they are returning to Israel. And God says, can a nation be born in a single day? Isaiah chapter 66, we'll read that. In one day, May 14, 1948, Israel was born. All the prophecy given to Israel was fulfilled during the rebirth of Israel in our age, in our time today. So we are seeing all these things happening. 700,000 came back between 1948 to 1967. Between the founding of Israel and the Yom Kippur War, when Israel took back Jerusalem, all right, 700,000 returned from Russia, especially Russia and Europe, and the population was 2.5 million that time. Now the population in Israel is about 8 million now, today. Only 8 million people in Israel today, all right? 16 million worldwide, 16 million Jews. Half of them are in Israel today. So we are looking at this as we look at Ezekiel, the prophecy of Ezekiel, the first 24 chapters. Israel has failed throughout history, God's design for them, to be used by God to reveal God's name. Israel has failed in that purpose. God chose them to be that bearer of his name, and they failed that. That was his purpose for humanity. Through Israel, all creation will be blessed. But Israel failed miserably in that. But that purpose will be fulfilled in the Great Tribulation. All right, when they look back at Christ and they say, Baruch haba Hashem Adonai. All right, like I said, 1/3 only will be left. Okay, and that will be the third return. As Jesus returns, comes to Petra or comes to Edom, takes them from Edom back into Jerusalem. All right, so we'll look at that when we come to it. All right, so this is talking about the regathering of the nation in the future. I will purge the rebels from among you, and I will bring them out of the country. They shall not enter the land of Israel. Then you will know that I'm God. So there's a step back now to the time of Ezekiel. So now this Ezekiel is talking about the imminent doom of Jerusalem under Nebuchadnezzar. All right, so you must understand how the Jews look at prophecy. From how the way the church looks at prophecy. We think that that's the event, this is the fulfillment. This is the event, this is the fulfillment. But the Jews see prophecy in terms of near fulfillment, far fulfillment. There's a time now, and there is a time in the future. So there is this view that I told you, the distant view and the near view. So this is a snapback to the near view. All right, verse 39. I'll push the rebels among you. I'll bring them out of the country, out of Israel, and they shall not enter the land anymore. Then you will know that I'm the Lord. As for you, O house of Israel, go, all of you, serve every one of you his idols. Make up your minds who you want to serve. All right, so here's God just giving them up. It's exactly like what Jesus said to the church in Laodicea in Revelation chapter 3:15. I wish you are either hot or cold. Don't be lukewarm. All right, pretending that you are God's people and worshiping idols. It's the same thing that Elijah told the nation of Israel when they were all gathered at Mount Carmel for that competition with the 430 false prophets of Baal. King Ahab gathered all of them there, and before Elijah heaped up his sacrifices, he told the nation of Israel who was gathered out watching, choose you this day whom you serve. If you want to worship Baal, go ahead. Right? If you want to worship God, come and join me. So Elijah was giving them that same challenge there in 1 Kings chapter 18. Here's Ezekiel, this is God speaking through Ezekiel, saying, go and serve your God. You want to serve your idols? Go ahead. But afterwards, no, we're going to look at the future again. Afterward, you will surely listen to me and no longer profane my holy name with all your gifts and idols. So here's looking to the future when Israel will be fulfilling God's purpose for them. All right, so now we take you back into the millennial kingdom, the time of the future, for on my holy mountain, right? Zion, on the heights of Israel, say the Lord God, there all Israel shall serve me again, and there I will accept them again. Your offerings and first fruits of all your sacrifice, I will accept you a sweet aroma when I bring you out from all the peoples, out from all the countries where you have been scattered, and I will be hallowed in you before the Gentiles again. You see, so that's the grand agenda. God, before the Gentiles, my name will be hallowed again. All right, so that's the final fulfillment of God's design for Israel, and we see this happening today. The church today, for a long time, we have been looking at Israel as the reject of God. But now churches are coming around. All the replacement theology they have thrown away now. Today, the churches are looking back at the nation of Israel after May 14, 1948. This is what God has prophesied Israel has come back. And when Trump moved the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, Bibi Netanyahu was quoting from this verse in Zechariah chapter 14 about the return of Christ. And he thanked President Trump, you have made it possible for this scripture to be fulfilled. He thanked Trump publicly. All right, so this is where the Gentiles are seeing the name of God being lifted up. And you shall know that I am the Lord when I bring you back into the land of Israel, the country that I had sworn to give to your fathers. This is the fourth time now, my oath, that I'll give it to the people of Israel. And there you shall remember your ways and all your doings with which you have been defiled. You shall loathe yourself. You shall mourn. Zechariah chapter 12 talks about that. You shall mourn because of all the evils that you have committed. Then you shall know that I am the Lord when I have dealt with you for my name's sake. All right, so that's the theme of chapter 20 there that we saw last week. So at the end of chapter 20, we see this beautiful restoration of the nation of Israel back to the land. And God's name being vindicated, not just to the one-third remnant of Jews in our time today, but also vindicated among the nations. And the nations shall know that he is God Almighty, the Holy One among his people. Mission accomplished. That's the grand design of God. And God's people, the Jews themselves, will again know that he is Lord. So this is where we need to pray. All right, today only 20% of the Jews in Israel are religious Jews. All right, so 80% of the Jews, they come back from Europe, they come back from Russia, they come back from everywhere. Yes, they're returning to the land out of the anti-Semitic things that are happening in the West, but the relationship with God is still not there. All right, so we need to pray for their eyes to be open. Otherwise, 2/3 of them will be lost. Now it's only 20%. We still need to get another 13%, 33% of them to be saved in the end time, because only 1/3 is going to come true. Okay, 2/3 are going to die. That's the prophecy, all right? And his people would repent and turn to God and mourn for their past sinfulness. So we need to pray towards that end, all right? And the people would then realize that God has been more than merciful to them, and they have actually received not the full wrath and justice of God. Because of his mercy, God had restored them. Okay? All right, so now we snap back to the original, the first one, where the elders came to Israel and wanted to go back. And then God spoke to Ezekiel, prophesy against the forest land, prophesy the south, say to the forest of the south, hear the word of the Lord God, I will kindle a fire in you. So we're coming back to the prophecy of Ezekiel about the impending invasion by Nebuchadnezzar. It shall devour every green tree, every dry tree in you. We saw that happening in Ezekiel chapter 5. The blazing flame shall not be quenched. All the faces from south to north shall be scorched. All flesh shall see that I, the Lord, have kindled it. All right, so God is going to bring that judgment, and it shall not be quenched. All right, so there's going to be a fire. We know that Jerusalem was set on fire and completely burned down by Nebuchadnezzar, 586 BC. All right, so we come to chapter 21 now. The conquest begins. All right, so chapter 21 is the prophecy of the sword of God. Very interesting chapter. Now, some of you might be wondering why is this judgment so rapidly? Every chapter we look at the warnings of judgment, the warning of judgment. This last section we're having today is the last warning of God regarding the impending, the imminent judgment. Right? God has got to keep warning us. Imagine if God doesn't warn Israel, all right, and let them just go on with the evil ways, and suddenly, boom, Nebuchadnezzar comes and destroy all of it. God is not like that. So God has given Israel repetitive warning. All right, year after year after year, 7 prophecies there that we've been looking at on prophecies of judgment. God is giving ample time, ample warning to the nation of Israel before judgment comes. Right. So when I think of this chapter, about 30 verses here on the prophecy of the Lord, of the sword, I'm thinking of what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 10. He says this, do not think that I have come to bring peace on the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but I've come to bring a sword. Hello. All right. So are we looking at this sword where God has drawn in chapter 21 of Nebuchadnezzar? And that sword is still around when Jesus brings it. Matthew chapter 10. Look, all of us have always seen as the coming of Jesus as a time of deliverance, as a time of peace on earth. The angels were shouting, peace on earth. But here is Jesus saying, I did not come to bring peace. I come to bring a sword. Whoever loves me more than father or mother and so on is not worthy of me. I'm bringing a sword between you and your parents, between you look, when we talk of the angels saying peace on earth and so on at the birth of Jesus during Christmas, it was the prophecy of when the Messiah comes in the end times. That will be the peace of God, all right, through the millennium, when Satan will be put in the abyss. All right. So yes, Christ comes to take our sin. That's the first step. But the eventual peace will only come, all right, during the millennium. All right. In the meantime, there will be sword. Imagine, after Jesus died, AD 70, the whole of Jerusalem was put to the sword by Rome. So that's a thing that you need to see here. All right. And Ephesians 6 and Hebrews 4 talks about the sword of the Spirit that is, the word of God is sharper than any two-edged sword. A two-edged sword is to cut the evil as well as the righteous people all cut away. When Jesus says, I bring a sword into this generation, is to cut away anything that would stop us from giving our lives to God. any idols in our life, not the idols of the old, but anything that we love more, any part of the world that we love more than God, that sword is going to cut it away. Every crutch that we have, that two-edged sword is going to cut away until there is only the adoration of God in our heart. All right, so we are seeing this prophecy of the sword right there, the sword of God right there in the beginning. All right, so verse 1 in chapter 21, the word of the Lord came to me saying, Son of man, set your face towards Jerusalem, prophesy against Jerusalem, preach against all their holy places, and say to Israel, thus says the Lord, behold, I am against you. Oh, this is a terrible, terrible thing. Imagine God is telling Israel, not Ezekiel, this is God's word. I am against you. This is directly from God. All right, so this has come to the time, the final warning, and God says, I am against you. I draw my sword out of his sheath, and I cut off both righteous and wicked from you. Two-edged sword. All right. We have looked at this before. I won't go into deeper understanding. I have a slide on this. When judgment comes on Jerusalem, both the innocent and the guilty will suffer. Very often, the innocent will suffer the consequences of sin of the elders. All right, so we have looked at that last week. I would look at. So this is the meaning. Because of your sin, good people are also going to be cut off by Nebuchadnezzar. My sword shall go out of his sheath against all flesh from south to north, that all may know that I, the Lord, have drawn my sword. It shall not return any more. God has drawn out his sword, and that sword will not return to its sheath. And that's why when Jesus says, I come to bring a sword, that sword is still unsheathed. It's still there. It'll only be put back after Calvary, I think, when God has put his wrath on the body of Jesus at Calvary. That is a time when God puts back his sword. But listen, friend, when the Great Tribulation starts, that sword will be unsheathed again. Remember the second horse of Revelation, the red horse? What was the rider holding? And to him was given a great sword. Revelation chapter 6. All right, go and read that. Okay. So we look at this. I came to bring a sword. This sword that God has not put back into his scabbard since the days of Ezekiel. So sigh, son of man, with a breaking heart, with bitterness before your eyes, mourn. And when they say, why, when the elders ask him, why are you sighing? You shall tell them, because it comes. Judgment is coming. And every heart will melt, all hands will be feeble, every spirit will faint, all the knees will be weak as water. They are going to wet their pants, everybody, all right, when Nebuchadnezzar comes. Behold, it is coming, it shall be brought to pass. So the sword is used, verse 8 to 17. The sword is sharpened and polished. See, God has spent all this time warning and warning and warning. God is prepared. The sword is already sharpened. Spend time sharpened or short, polish it. Case closed. All right? So God is all prepared now for the judgment that's to come, for a dreadful slaughter. It despises the scepter of my son, as it does all wood. So this one is talking about the sword of God is going to destroy the line of David, the scepter of my son. All the kings, Zedekiah, the last king of Israel, will be gone. And the line of David will be cut, as the sword cuts all wood. So even his promise that the kings of Israel will come from the line of David, that is going to stop here when Nebuchadnezzar came. So cry and wail, son of man, it will be against my people, against all the princes of Israel, the royal kings of Israel. Therefore, strike your thighs, strike your hands, beat your breast. NIV puts it that way in lament, because you have ignored all the chances given to you. Okay, 2,000 years of patience, from the time of Moses until now. The third time, let the sword do double damage. All right, go and read your verses. I'm shortening it here to make space for my slide. So he's talking about 3 strikes. Third time. And we know Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar invaded Jerusalem 3 times. All right. So 605 BC, Daniel was taken away. 597 BC, Ezekiel was taken away. Third time, 588 BC, it comes again. So at the third strike, it will do double damage. That means the capital city of Israel, Jerusalem, will be gone. The temple will be gone. That's the double damage there. And it is a sword that slays great men, enters their private chambers, and I have set the point of the sword against all their gates. That means every gate out of Jerusalem, God put his sword there. There is no more escape. All your excuses to try and escape this judgment is not accepted. His sword is stationed at every gate. All right, so what we see here, verse 6, the sword is the last chance. All right, he's not going to unsheath the sword anymore. All right, he's not going to put it away. Verse 7, the sword of God is a rod of fearful judgment. I told you, you will wet your pants and so on, and there is nowhere to hide. And we see that happening again in Revelation chapter 6 at the 6th seal, when the wrath of God is revealed. The same words are being used here. Verse 6, and yet, despite all this judgment, there is this: let your heart groan, let you sigh. So here we see the mercy of God. While there is judgment, there is no pleasure in the judgment. There's just pain. There's just despair. Beat your breast, beat your hands in despair. All right? Just like us, when we take up a cane to whack our children for disobedience, it's not that we enjoy that judgment, that punishment. There is pain in our hearts as parents, right? And we are told in verse 9, he cuts out any future king ruling on David's throne. The scepter is cut off. The authority to rule is cut off until the time of the Messiah. We'll look at that, right? Verse 14, 3 waves of the sword. I looked at that. And Nebuchadnezzar is God's instrument. In fact, God calls him my servant twice. In Jeremiah chapter 25, you see that there. I just want to talk about Ukraine a bit, but a lot of you have been praying against Putin, against Russia, and so on. Be very careful. You don't know. If God uses Nebuchadnezzar as his servant, God uses Cyrus as his Messiah. All these are enemies, invaders of Israel. And God calls them his servant, so that the purposes of God may be fulfilled. What you see in Putin and Ukraine today, do not be hasty in praying against the evil of Russia and so on. Could be the servant of God like Nebuchadnezzar. Imagine Israel praying against Nebuchadnezzar. No, God's purposes are being fulfilled here. Right? So, yes, pray for the lives of the people in Ukraine that are being affected. Not just Christians. A lot of you, I noticed, you're just praying for the church. Look, there are Muslims there. There are a lot of Jews there. All right? So many people. Just pray for God's people, righteous people, people who love and fear God to be saved. Right? Do not be selective, premature in our understanding of what's going on there. All right? And I told you just now, the innocent will be affected as well. Now let's give you a bit of verse here. A lot of you quoted this verse to me in Exodus 34, right? The Lord is merciful, gracious, long-suffering, and so on, keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression of sin, but by no means clear the guilty, but will visit iniquity of the father upon the children to the third and fourth generation. A lot of we looked at this verse last week when I talked about generational sin, and God says, no, the soul that sins, it dies. You shall not die because of your father's sin, neither neither is the Father judged because of your sin. All right, but God's principle has always been the soul that sins, it shall die. But however, sometimes the consequences of sin affects our children right to the third and the fourth generation. So the righteous sometimes suffer because of the sins of the fathers. So this is what Exodus 34 means. It's not the judgment of God, it's the consequences that leads to suffering. And sometimes God allows this suffering for a purpose that many of us don't see. Right? So I'm just giving you a verse here. Good people sometimes pass away young. The godly often die before their time. Isaiah 57 says this. Okay? No one seems to care or wonder why. No one seems to understand that God is protecting them from the evil to come. Hello? See that verse? The same thing happened in 2 Kings chapter 2, chapter 22, 20. Josiah was such a righteous king, but he died very early in his battle with Pharaoh Necho in the battle of Megiddo. All right? Why do God take away people, righteous, good people, at a very young age? Here, the two verses here says that. 2 Kings 2 and Isaiah 57. Sometimes God removes righteous people early so that they are protected from the evil to come, so that they don't see and they don't suffer the consequences up to the third and fourth generation of their fathers. Because after Josiah, all right, after Josiah, all his sons, 4 kings that all were wicked, that brought down the nation of Israel. All right, we have Jehoahaz, Jehoiakim, Jehoiachin, and Zedekiah. All these are the 4 sons of Josiah. Well, not Jehoiachin. Jehoiachin is the grandson. Sorry. Right, so God shielded him from this tragedy, took him off early. That is what 2 Kings is saying. So you must understand sometimes the purposes of God here. Okay, now let's go to the second part of chapter 21. After the sword here, now this is Nebuchadnezzar coming now, right? The final conquest. Appoint a road for the sword to go to Rabbah of Ammon and to Judah into Jerusalem. For the king of Babylon now stands at the fork of 2 roads. And he began to use divination. He shakes the arrows, he consults the idols, he looks at the liver. And into his right hand came the divination for Jerusalem. Okay, so here God is giving Ezekiel to tell the people this story. Nebuchadnezzar is at the crossroads and he is wondering, shall I go south to Ammon, Jordan? We'll look at that next week. All right, shall I go and attack the Ammonites, Jordan? Or shall I proceed on further east into Israel and to Jerusalem? So he was wondering what to do, and he began to consult his gods, his idols, for which is the best course of action. All right, so there are 3 ways mentioned there of how he consulted for divine approval to where to go. He shakes the arrows. That's known as balamancy. All right, you consulting which arrow should point to which direction. So some Chinese people, they go to the temple and they pray and they throw down 2 pieces of wood, and which is the decision that their God tells them to do. All right, so this is the same thing here that Nebuchadnezzar is consulting. All right, and also he looks at the liver. So these are some of the ancient methods of casting lots or divination. All right, but God is still in control. You may consult your images, you may consult your arrows, but God decides for him. All right, so we looked at that when we studied Jonah last year. All right, so the sailors decided who is the culprit that has caused all this storm in the sea, and they cast lots, and God caused the lot to fall on Jonah. So we saw that in Jonah chapter 1 last year. It's the same thing. Right? So you may consult all your mediums and so on, but behind it, God is the one who moves all these pieces together. And God moved the decision for Nebuchadnezzar to attack Jerusalem and not Jordan. All right, so Nebuchadnezzar attacks Jordan way after the fall of Jerusalem. We'll look at that next week. Yeah? So now to you, O profane, wicked prince of Israel, Zedekiah, all right? Your day has come, your iniquity shall end. Remove the turban, you can mourn. Take off the crown, take off your crown. Nothing shall remain the same. All right, so the kings of Israel was cut there. Remove your crown. All right, nothing shall remain the same. Until today, there is the scepter of Israel is gone. Right until today. Okay, and then the last verse there, overthrown or ruined. Some Bible says, ruin. I will make it a ruin 3 times. Overthrown, overthrown, overthrown. So the prophecy is mentioned 3 times. It is a definite thing. It shall be no longer. But look at this verse here, verse 27. Until he comes, whose right it is, and I will give it to him. Now, if you want to look at the key verse in all these 24 chapters that we have been looking at since August last year, this is the key verse. All the judgments will come, everything will be destroyed until he comes, whose right it is, and I will give it to him. That's the key verse for the entire 24 chapters. When Jesus comes again, then he will be the line of David that God restores back his promise. All right, so this is a prophecy that was given way back by Jacob in Egypt. Genesis chapter 49, when he talks of his son Judah, the scepter, the authority to rule in justice. The scepter will not depart from the tribe of Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, authority, until he to whom it belongs, Jesus, shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be unto him. All right, so here is Jacob prophesying, from the line of Judah shall come this ruler. And the scepter that's going to be taken away from Zedekiah, that scepter, that authority to rule, belongs to him, and it shall be returned to him. All right, so that's the fulfillment of this prophecy here. David, Ezekiel 37, we are going to come to it later this in May. My servant David shall be king over all of them again, and they shall have one shepherd, and they shall walk in my judgments and observe my statutes and do them. All right, so Ezekiel 37, the valley of the dry bones, after they return from Jerusalem, after the second coming. All right, Jesus is going to be king again. All right, so you see this, and Psalms 2 says the same thing. All right, so since the fall of Jerusalem in Nebuchadnezzar's time, 586 BC, since the death of Zedekiah, Israel has been under foreign domination. Israel has been unable to govern themselves. No king until today, because God cut that chapter in this prophecy of Ezekiel chapter 21 here. All right, and you notice even during the time of the crucifixion of Christ, the Jewish Sanhedrin cannot make that decision. They have no authority, no scepter to rule in justice. They must consult Rome. They must send Jesus to Herod. All right, they can't make that, although they want to kill Jesus, but they do not have the scepter, the authority to do that. To today, we have a prime minister of Israel, Naftali Bennett, we have the president of Israel, but there is no king, still under foreign domination. Naftali Bennett is under the thumbs of the USA today, all right? And just as the Sanhedrin was under the thumbs of Pontius Pilate and King Herod during Jesus' time. Okay? So you see this happening, waiting for Christ to return again when that scepter will return to him. All right? So now let's go to Ezekiel. I want to go up to chapter 24. How can I finish? Okay, I'm going to cut short very fast. Chapter 22, 23, we have already done previously. It is repetitive. Just a quick look at some pointers there. 22, now the Son of Man, will you judge the bloody city? God is asking Ezekiel, will you judge this bloody city? Show to her all her abominations. Then say, thus says the Lord, the city sheds blood in her midst, that her time may come. She makes idols to defile herself. You are guilty by the blood you have shed. You have defiled yourself with the idols. You have caused your days to draw near. You have come to the end of your years. Therefore, I have made you a mockery to all the countries. This is the end. There is no way back. Israel, you are a holy city, but now you have become a bloody city. Israel, you are supposed to be a beacon of my light and of my name, but now you have become a mockery to all the nations. Why? Because of all the bloodshed you have shed in you. All right, so they have persecuted their own people. They have. We're going to look at that later. Huh? So I just point out some verses because we have already looked at this repetitively in the past. For verse 6 to 15, we have looked at this in chapter 16 of Ezekiel. Chapter 22 repeats it. You have broken all the statutes that are given to you. All the Mosaic covenant, you have forgotten them. You have broken them. You have lost the faith that I've given to you. And because of that, your morals, your characters have all been tainted. And therefore now awaiting you will just be doom. And I will scatter you among the nations. So it's a severe warning to Israel for forgetting their God and forgetting the commandments of God. All right, so 16 verses there, it ends with this, I'm going to scatter you among the nations, plural. So this brings you back to AD 70. All right, so from verse 17 to 22, it tells you, because you have forgotten, you have become dross, you have become rusty, you have become garbage. All right, and I will put you into the smelting fire to smelt you, all right, to clean out all that dross. And that's God's justice. All right, so behold, our Lord is a consuming fire. So those 5 verses talks about God's wrath as a fire. Huh? And then from verse 23 to 29, because of this, that whole land has become polluted. The land is no longer clean. There is no more righteous leaders in all of Israel. So God names 4 categories of people here. Your princes, all your royal class, the nobles, you are consumed by your greed and you have oppressed your people and you have killed your people. Shed bloodshed because of that. Your priests, all right, you are supposed to be an example of what is right and wrong, but you are suffering from astigmatism, all right? Your line of justice and holiness have been blurred. That's what God is saying, all right? And then the prophets, you are supposed to speak my words of warning to the people, but you instead have given them false assurances that I will still save you when I'm about to judge you. So your prophecy is false out of your own ambition and imagination. And lastly, to the people. So the 4 P's there, the priest, the prince, the prophets, and the people. All levels of society is gone. People, you are predators and you exploit each other for personal gains. All right, so go home and read that. So this is God's accusation. We have looked at that, but let's end with this, verse 30. I sought for a man. So because of all this, I sought for a man among them who would make a wall. The prophets were supposed to make a wall, but remember we looked at that in chapter, I forgot what chapter 17, I think. It talks about you just put on plaster to the wall, and that plaster is not mixed with glue and so on. You're a false prophet, right? So I look for a man to stand on the wall, to stand in the gap before me on behalf of the land, someone who would be a watchman, someone who would plead the cause of Israel, that I should not destroy it. But I found no one, not even one, who would stand to plead on the behalf of the whole nation of Israel. Therefore, I poured out my indignation, and I consumed them with the fire of wrath. All right. So remember Genesis chapter 18, when Abraham stood before God to plead for the salvation of Sodom and Gomorrah. All right. So he pleaded from 50 down to 5. Even if there are 5, will you spare? And God says, yes, I will even spare Sodom if I can find 5. But he couldn't even find 5. He found only 4. Okay. And out of the 4, 1 was lost also. Okay. So Sodom was destroyed. Here he found none. Not even Lot. Okay, that's why somebody asked me last week, all right, why mention about Sodom and Gomorrah in chapter 16? God is comparing Israel, you are worse than Sodom here. Okay? Esther stood before God and saved the Jews. Remember? All right. So here are watchmen, Jesus being a watchman. All right. So is God saying the same thing to us today before he destroys the world, before the great tribulation comes? God is looking for someone to stand in the gap before me on behalf of this planet here, that I should not destroy it. Okay? So somber, very somber. All right, so chapter 23 is the parable of 2 sisters. All right, so again, I won't look at it a lot. We have looked at it in chapter 16. Just that this chapter, there is so much more graphic language on the prostitution and the whoredom of these 2 sisters. All right, Aholah and Aholiba. The meaning of Aholah, Aholiba, her tent, and my tent is in her, the tent of idol worship here. Right. So this talks about the older sister, Aholah, that talks about the 10 northern tribes of Israel, the prostitution. Whereas chapter 15 and 16 was talking about Israel as a prostitute. It is a spiritual prostitution there. We looked at that last year, where Israel forgot God, or Jerusalem forgot God, and went after idols. So it was a spiritual harlotry, spiritual prostitution. But this chapter 23 is not so much spiritual, but more political. They forgot God as their protector, but they look more to America, to Russia, to be their savior. That's what's happening in the world today, Israel. Okay, so rather than turning towards God, they are turning to other nations, Assyria. So Israel was looking more towards Assyria to protect them, but Assyria came and conquered them. All right, Aholiba was looking towards Assyria, King Ahaz. All right, King Ahaz is a terrible king. All right, if you read the history, he made a treaty with Sennacherib of Assyria and saying, you don't attack Judah, you go and attack my brother in Samaria. So it's self-preservation at the expense of Israel in the north. And so Judah was looking towards Assyria under King Ahaz, Babylon, and we are also looking at Egypt during Zedekiah's time. Right, so they were looking at making treaties with all the nations around them for their own security and not turning to God. So this chapter is more on this political prostitution, all right? And they forgot God. And therefore, judgment is going to come in Deuteronomy chapter 8. Go and read that. Both sisters will be judged. Verse 36 to 49. There are 50 verses here. I'm quickly going through them. And God says in verse 48, your lewdness, okay, your whoredom shall cease from the land. Right? The only future for Israel is when the faithful return to relearn the practice of faithfulness and honor to my name. But as long as you look to foreign nations, which is what is happening to Israel today, those nations are going to abandon you, just as Assyria abandoned Israel. Just as Babylon, remember Hezekiah invited the king of Babylon into the temple itself. All right. And Isaiah told Hezekiah, "You're stupid because Babylon is going to come and conquer you." Israel today looks to America. When the king of the north invades Israel, what does America do? Nothing. Nothing. What does America do to Ukraine today? Nothing. We won't send our soldiers there to protect. The same pattern you see happening here today. All right. So I'm pointing out a few verses here for us to gain something here. When she carried on her prostitution openly, this is to the Judah, Aholiba. When Aholiba carried on her prostitution publicly, exposed her naked body to all these nations around, I turned from her in disgust. I turned away from her in disgust, just as I turned away from her elder sister, Aholah, in Israel. So God turned away from Israel. Assyria came in 722 BC and destroyed and carried away the 10 northern tribes. Now God turns away from Judah. So there is a point in time in our rebellion against God when God turns away from us. Be very careful. You think you can get away by sinning and sinning, but there will come a point in time when God says, I turn away in disgust. I don't want to see the end. What's going to happen to you? All right? Samson learned this bitter truth. He sinned and he sinned and he sinned against Delilah until a point in time when God left. Remember at Calvary, Matthew chapter 27, verse 46, when Jesus cried out, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? God turned away from Jesus. He turned away from Jesus. When the sins of the whole world was put on the shoulders of Jesus at Calvary, God, in disgust for the sins of mankind, past, present, future, God turned away. And for the first time, Jesus felt that breakaway from God. And that's why he cried out, why hast thou forsaken me? All the time he has had that relationship with the Father. But at that moment in Calvary, for those 3 hours there, God turned away. Same thing happened. All right? And it will happen again to Israel one day. Verse 21. So you long for the lewdness of your youth, when in Egypt your bosom was caressed and your young breast was fondled. As I told you, the graphic language here. Here's an important thing here. You long for the lewdness of your youth. Israel has been delivered out of Egypt. They have been taken out of Egypt, but they have not taken Egypt out from their heart. Egypt was still in their heart, so they are still longing to return to Egypt. They are still longing for the sins that they have enjoyed in Egypt. Lot's wife, remember Lot's wife? Right, the 4 that escaped from Sodom. Lot's wife turned back and longed for her past life of sin in Sodom. And God turned her into a blob of salt. Okay, same thing. So listen, there is a danger for those of us who have been called out from the miry clay. God has called us out from darkness into his marvelous light. Don't look back at the joys of the darkness which we once had enjoyed. The danger of returning to the pleasures of past sins. And that was what God judged Judah for. They longed back to return back to the past lives at the Egypt. Verse 25, they shall remove your nose, they shall remove your ears, They shall strip off your clothing. This was the typical punishment for prostitutes in ancient days. They cut off their nose, they cut off their ears so that their faces are marred for life and they will be stigmatized as prostitutes. All right. So God is telling them this. You continue in your prostitution, your people, those people that you trusted, will come and destroy you. Okay. The same thing God is telling us today. The ugliness of our sin will be exposed. Okay. But thank God, because through Jesus Christ, his blood has wiped away all these cleanses. Those that would not come under the blood of Christ, at the great white throne judgment, when books are opened, all these things are going to be revealed. So it's a reminder for the painful consequences of sin. All right, so let's carry on. Verse 32. Thus says the Lord God, you shall drink of your sister's cup. This to Judah. You shall drink the same cup that your sister drank in Israel. The deep and white one is a deep cup and a white cup. And you shall be laughed to scorn. You're supposed to bear my name. You are now a mockery, and you shall be held in derision. And that cup contains much, the wrath of God. You'll be filled with drunkenness and sorrow, the cup of horror and desolation, the cup of your sister Samaria. You shall drink it, and you shall drain it. Now, this is talking of the cup of judgment. Cup of judgment. Okay. And just to give you a few verses here, I think I better stop here. Psalm 75 verse 8 says, a cup that is filled with spices that has severe effect to poison the wicked. Psalm 22 is a poem, a prophecy on the wicked. They will drink this cup that will only poison themselves. Okay. Isaiah 51 talks about calamity. This is also talking of Babylon that's coming, all right, with a cup of double calamity. All right, with famine and sword, with ruin and destruction, with the capital of Jerusalem being burned and the temple being destroyed. There is a double calamity. Isaiah prophesied of that cup of double calamity there. Revelation chapter 17 and 18, we saw mystery Babylon, the mother of all harlots. We are talking of harlots here, two harlots here, Ahola, Aholiba. Chapter 16, we are talking of three harlots. All right, Jerusalem, Judah, and Samaria. I didn't cover that. All right, chapter 16. And here, chapter 22, chapter 23, two harlots, Samaria and Judah. And Revelation chapter 18 talks about the mother of all harlots. Harlots has always been associated with Israel. When Israel rejects their God, God sees Israel as a prostitute, an unfaithful wife, a harlot. And that's why when I talk of mystery Babylon, the woman that sat on the scarlet beast, could it be Israel in the end times? Could that nation in the end, the scarlet beast, be the nation of Israel itself that had turned to Antichrist instead of Christ? Wait and see. Okay? So we are told in chapter 18, verse 6 there, Revelation chapter 18, that this harlot that sits on the scarlet beast, the mother of all harlots, she drinks a double portion of the cup of wrath of God. It's a double portion, a double calamity that Isaiah was prophesying about. Why double portion? Because here in the prophecy of Ezekiel 23, the first portion, you shall drink of the cup, Judah, that your sister drink, one cup. End time, Israel is going to drink it again. If what I say is true, the mother of all harlot is Israel in the end time. You are going to drink it again. Your sister, Jerusalem drank it in Ezekiel's time. In the Great Tribulation end time, you are going to drink it again. That's the double portion there. Okay, we'll go and read that, Revelation chapter 18. And I want to bring you to what Jesus prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane. He mentioned the cup also, this cup of judgment. Father, if it be your will, let this cup of double portion, double calamity, pass from me. He knew what he was going to suffer at Calvary. Not just the pain of crucifixion in Calvary, but the pain of being separated when God turned away. Double portion here. The pain of God's rejection and the pain of the sin of the whole being on him. And he prayed that 3 times. And yet he says, nevertheless, not my will, but your will. The cup of God's judgment. All right. So here is I want to bring it to the present today. An inside look at the kind of judgment that's going to happen in our world today. Verse 37 in chapter 23 says this: they made money by letting their children pass through the fire. They sacrificed their children to the idol god Amalek, and they made money from that because they're given food by the priests and so on. So these women that sacrificed children, they got they made money out of it. Right? By sacrificing the children, the priests reward them, and so on. That's verse 27. But God is abhorrent about that. You make money by killing your own children. And that's exactly what's happening today. People are making millions out of the trade of abortion. Isn't it the same thing? We are sacrificing our babies to the god of Malek and making money out of it. There's wealth, a lot of money from the abortion clinics there. And on the same day, verse 38 says this, on the same day that they sacrificed their children to Malek, they came to the temple to worship God. Here is God looking at the disgust of this thing. After sacrificing your babies to the idol, you come into my temple to worship me. Horrible. Awful, right? So this thing is happening. Verse 46 says this: the same mob that they served with their prostitution, that same mob is going to come and destroy you. As I mentioned just now, you trusted Assyria, Assyria will destroy you. You trusted Babylon, Babylon is going to destroy you. The same thing is happening to Israel today. Who would you trust? Well, so Israel is in a very difficult situation today. They dare not rile up Russia because they have good relations with Russia. And Russia has allowed them to bomb Syria without retaliating. They are afraid of America because America is supplying them all the military technology and so on. But in the end, these two nations may come and destroy them. Gog and Magog war, and America helpless, doing nothing. We are told that. Same thing happening during Ezekiel's time. We are seeing similar possibilities happening today. So it's time for the church and for Israel to wake up. There's no one that we can turn to. There's only God, whose name we bore. The family of God that we are. Okay? So I think I must stop now. It's late. All right, so I'll do chapter 24 next week. 24 is the final conquest. So I come right to the final conquest, but I can't get to it. All right, there are some great things to learn in chapter 24. We'll do that next session. Okay, so Father God, we just want to come again and thank you. Thank you for this lovely picture that's given to us that in the end, through our rebellions, through our many disappointments to you, and yet your mercy shines through, and that you will regather all of us, Jews and Greeks, Jews and Gentiles, together into that one family that you have always wanted us to be. A gathering of your people in Zion, honoring you and worshiping you again. We are called to bear your name. We ask, Lord, that even as we looked at the failure of Israel that have failed in every way to bring honor to your name, even to this day, it's a awesome and a heavy task that you've given us to be your living epistles today, that through our action and our words, we will not tarnish your name in any way. And we pray, Father, for your people in Israel today, that they too may have that blindness be removed from their eyes, and they shall behold the privileged position that you have given to them to bear your holy name, so that nations around them may see you and glorify you. We pray for that revelation, for that repentance to come upon all the world who have yet to know you, and especially your people. We just pray, Father, for your mercy to be extended, especially to this nation, that as we look to them and as we pray for that peace in Jerusalem, you in your mercy will come and touch the other 80% of the population in that nation to behold you and to come back to you, that your grand design for your creation will finally be fulfilled, and the whole world will bend the knee and proclaim that Jesus is Lord of Lords, King of Kings. When you come again, we praise you and thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.